I don't know about you, but I feel a little bit sad that we're finishing this wonderful book that we've been in for a while. So again, where is Jeremiah? Physically? As he's writing this? So he was in Jerusalem, right? And then Babylon came in and they destroyed everything and things are falling apart and it's not quite over, but it's pretty close to being over. And then Jeremiah says to these people, hey, don't go where, Cole? Don't go to Egypt, right? And so they, of course, did what? They went to Egypt and they took him with them. And they get to Egypt, and we didn't go into the details of this, but God has Jeremiah put these bricks like in Egypt, saying like right above this place is where Babylon is going to set up there, like they're going to come and destroy it. Like there's no place to run. God is the one that's doing this. And then the last 3 chapters of Jeremiah, the first 2 are really prophecies that jump all the way to the end, not just of this battle of Babylon invading Egypt and Jerusalem and all these places, but the 70 years later that God speaks about, where Babylon falls and God's people then are returning back to Jerusalem. So chapters 50 and 51 are a prophecy about Babylon. It's written in like, here's what's happening, here's why this is happening, but it's prophetic for a time in the future when this is going to happen. So again, the prophecy, the verse 2, which is really interesting, the language that's used, because what is Babylon doing to the Israelites? It's capturing, taking into captivity. It's the same language that's used for what's going to happen to Babylon, that you too will be destroyed, you too will be captured, you too will be taken into captivity. And that this kind of intersects with God's people going back to his place, to Jerusalem. I'm going to punish the king of Babylon and his land. And then he says, just like I did Assyria. Who was the one who punished Assyria? I know God orchestrated it, but who was the one that destroyed Assyria? Babylon. So remember what God said that Assyria was when they were like, how could you use Assyria? They're so evil. God says they are a what? A tool in my hand. That's right. And then he says, but I'll destroy them too, because I'm not saying they're good. I'm using them to accomplish my purposes. And then he uses Babylon to destroy Assyria. And then now he's saying exact same stuff to Babylon. They're wicked. I'm not condoning their behavior and their way, but they're a tool in my hand and I'm going to destroy them too. And so I am destroying them. I'm destroying them for their wickedness. And then this really beautiful thing in verse 19 of the purpose of all of this. Because when you stand back and you watch, you might make, and truthfully, a lot of people who talk about the Old Testament, I'd like to say non-Christians, but Christians too, of like the God of the Old Testament is just mean and he's violent and but we get to see a little bit here. Verse 19, I will bring Israel back to his pasture, and he will graze on Carmel and Bashan, and his desire will be satisfied in the hill country of Ephraim and Gilead. So this is, Israel, we're going to be back in this place. In those days and at that time, declares the Lord, search will be made for the iniquity of Israel, but there will be none. That he's purifying his people. That through this time, the purpose of all of this is to purify his people. And then, there's so much more to all of this that's shared, but like what's happening to Babylon, why it is, and then kind of at the end of the chapter, verses 45 and 46, he has planned against Babylon to do this. This is God's purpose. And then verse 46, at that shout, Babylon has been seized. Their end is coming too. Then when you go into chapter 51, it explains, which will be no surprise to us, why is Babylon destroyed? It's the same thing we've heard about Jerusalem and the surrounding cities and the surrounding nations and the surrounding kings. Why are people destroyed? Because they live in wickedness and sin. And so in the same way, Babylon has the same thing going on for them. And there's this promise of Israel and Judah has not been forsaken. This is a purpose that God has. This is a work that God is doing for them, for their benefit. And also the picture that you see through all of this is for the glory of God. That it's not, I'm mad at you, and so I'm going to punish you. It's, I created you for a purpose to accomplish something, and my reasoning for wanting to accomplish that thing is to be a message. Again, we come back to the promise to Abraham. I will bless you so that you will be a blessing to the nations, right? It's not just about them. It's about a message. It's a bigger picture that's shared with others. And so this is kind of I'm coming against a behavior. It's a people that are doing the behavior, but I'm coming against it to purify the people so that the behavior stops, so that the message could be right again. And the message is what? Glorify God, the goodness of God, the power of God, the way of God. And so that's what all of this is about. And then in chapter 51, verse 59, we get a very practical explanation of what I said at the beginning of these two chapters. This is something that was written before, that was kept and carried. It was spoken, but it was kept and carried also later, after everything happens. And so Jeremiah, he wrote this, he sealed it up, and he sent this guy to take it and read it, and that's what this was kept for. So it was written prior to all of this, but the language is very plainly saying, this is what's being proclaimed as Babylon is falling. And so it's very present language, but it's while Babylon is like still on the uprise of their conquering. And so it's kind of confusing as you read it because the timing seems a little bit off. Then in chapter 52, and so we're going to go into Ezekiel here in a second. This timeline is kind of fluidly around the same timeline of what we're going to be reading in Ezekiel. So that the progression is not 51, 52, 50, or 50, 51, 52, and then Ezekiel 24. You'll kind of see as we go through Ezekiel, these things are happening simultaneously. But Jeremiah 52, I would really encourage you to go through and really spend some time reading this if you didn't get a chance to, because it very specifically shows so much of what we've learned and talked about for the temple, the tabernacle, what they did with it. So, you know, in the tabernacle, they just had the laver. But when Solomon and these guys rebuilt not a tabernacle, but now a temple, there was still the laver, but it was way bigger. And it was sitting on the backs of these oxen that there was, I think, 3 facing in north, south, east, and west. And they were made of bronze. And so it was the same materials, but like way cooler and more extreme because you're not having to carry it. So they were able to build something more solidified. And again, the money to pay for all of this, who was it that in large part raised the money to do this? It was King David who said, okay, if God says I can't build it, well, I'm going to raise the money so that whoever can, my son can, he'll be ready to go as soon as he takes over. And so these images, these pieces that were in the desert and then kind of expounded upon in the temple, this is what 52 goes through and shows. This is what Babylon did. The posts that stand on either side of the temple as you walk in to the holy place, where the altar of showbread and the altar of incense and the golden lampstands are. There's pillars on either side. It talks about those pillars and where they were taken and how they were cut and melted down and dispersed to these different areas. So it is if you don't know anything about the temple or any of these elements, it's like, okay, whatever. But if you know what they're talking about, these are the same sacred elements that we've been talking about that are the picture of Jesus, the picture of God, that these guys are coming in and burning and cutting to pieces and scattering all over the place. It's really pretty profound. And I would really encourage you to read through it. And as you do, when you're like, wait, what's that? Like find out what it is, like research, what component is that these guys are talking about. Because you remember I think it was last week or the week before, we talked about how God adorned Israel. They were like a bloody newborn baby left in the desert, and then like how I gave you the bracelets and the earrings and the crown and all that stuff, and what you did is you turned around and sold those same things, and it like built this beautiful construction, and then this heartbreaking deconstruction of all those pieces that were used. This is really, God constructed all this stuff to make Israel this great people, this great picture, this great nation. This chapter shows the piece by piece deconstruction of, because of their sin, because of their wickedness, because they've come so far from God, all these pieces then in the same way are removed from them. And so It's heartbreaking, but it's also important, I think, for us to see and to understand that. And then it goes into how many, because again, there's the final kind of fall of Jerusalem, what's happening here. But there's, when Daniel and Ezekiel were taken, and the king Jehoiakim was taken earlier. Now there's the new king Zedekiah, and so it explains this many were taken at this time, this many were taken at this time. And then we come to the end of Jeremiah. So Jerusalem is falling, it's on fire. The only people that are left behind are the really, really poor, and they are taken and like put to tend to the fields. Everybody else is taken into exile, the general population, and then the leaders of the people who are left, Zedekiah and those guys, they're all brought before the king of Babylon, and he kills them all. And so it's a crazy, sad, violent end. But then there's this really strange, kind of cool / confusing last part of Jeremiah, chapter 52. So now it came about, starting in verse 31. Now it came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. So Jehoiakim was a king earlier who was brought into captivity, kind of like Daniel and Ezekiel and those guys. And he's been in prison all this time, as everything else that's happening with Jeremiah is going on. In the 12th month, on the 25th day of the month, the evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, showed favor to Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and brought him out of prison. So as this is happening, as this is coming to the end, for some reason, this, violent, wicked king goes to the previous king of Jerusalem, and he brings him out of prison. And then verse 32, and then he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the thrones of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So there is a religious, spiritual belief called universalism that you'll probably run into a lot, that is basically, I don't think that people even understand sometimes that this is what they believe. But have you ever heard someone say, they're Muslim, they're Christian, they're Jew, it's all the same God? You've heard that language before? That's universalism. It's that, all of them have some version of truth. They're all probably sort of good. And so we should just accept all of these ideas. This is the belief of Babylon. This is how Babylon believed. And so when they would destroy a kingdom, many kings at that time, as they would destroy the kingdom, they would make sure that all lineage of the kings were destroyed, so that there was no one to rise up for the people to rally around. And that was their strategy. Babylon didn't do that. They assimilated. And so their religion, they would, kind of take on, and okay, your gods are good too. And we have ours, and now we have even more. And then they would take royalty or even kings, and they would bring them into their court. So you remember Daniel, he's being fattened up and studied up so that he can be a part of Nebuchadnezzar's court. That's kind of part of this practice. And so the king would have his seat here, like at the end of the hall, and then kind of lining the sides would be all these other kings that had been conquered from all these other nations. And so they're still sitting on a throne, but a throne lower than his. And the closer to him that you were, the more powerful under king you were compared to the others. And so what the king does is he goes and he gets King Jehoiakim, he brings him out of prison. So he wasn't sitting at one of these thrones. He brings him into this throne room, and he scoots everybody else down. So this king is at the highest place of all the other kings that are in this room. And so he spoke kindly to him, set his throne above the thrones of the kings who are with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim changed his prison clothes, and he had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. For his allowance, a regular allowance was given to him by the king of Babylon, a daily portion all the days of his life until the day of his death. So not only was he brought out of prison, he was given royal clothes, a royal seat, ate royal meals, and he was given money. It wasn't like his money, but he lived as a wealthy man at the graces of the king of Babylon. And that's how Jeremiah ends. Isn't that kind of a weird way for it to end? But what do we know the bigger picture is? What did we just read about in the last 2 chapters? Babylon's going to fall. And what's God going to do with his people? He's going to restore them and bring them back. And so, unbeknownst to this king of Babylon, it's this prophetic picture of my people are not utterly destroyed. There still is favor. God is still moving, and a day is coming. And it's kind of this very subtle, very strange message at the end of Jeremiah that this is not the end. So, any questions or thoughts before we jump into Ezekiel? Isn't that a cool book? I think so too. So much to it. A lot in there. All right, so if you'll turn in your Bibles with me to Ezekiel. And we're going to try to hit quite a few chapters here if we can. To not quite finish everything, but we're gonna get pretty close to the end of Ezekiel here. So starting in chapter 24, there is two really heartbreaking pictures. The first is God prophetically, like Ezekiel has before. Again, so where is Ezekiel? He's in Babylon. He's in captivity. So he's not with the Daniel guys being given nice foods and trained up. He's just kind of there. These are the people, again, that the message was get married, buy houses, be a blessing, pray. So he's amongst those guys. And God's been having him do a lot of these prophetic acts. God revealed himself. I'm leaving the tabernacle. I'm leaving the temple because there's so much wickedness and everything there. Now we see the temple destroyed because God's gone. So he's not protecting it. So these guys, and they come and they take it over. And then God has Ezekiel do this prophetic picture where he takes a pot and he, boils up the water, and then he puts all the choice meat and everything in it. And to put it in really plain language, God is like, get it real hot, cook it real good until all the impurities are gone. That's what I'm doing to my people. I am cooking them until there is nothing of wickedness left. Throw the wood on, get that fire up and go, and this is the picture. So as Jerusalem is falling, or, in the same time frame, God is saying, boiled up, cooked to done, this is what I'm doing to my people. To remove the impurities, to remove and there's a little bit even of the language in this passage but there's so much wickedness in them, this isn't enough. There's still more purifying that needs to take place. So again, Ezekiel is doing this in front of the people, explaining to the people why he's doing this about their family, friends, relatives who are over in this city being destroyed. Ezekiel's job, I don't want to take a whole lot of time saying this, but I think it's important because the timing. Right now, a lot of things that are righteous or a lot of things that are good are being called wicked. A lot of telling someone the truth or doing something that honors God, people would say that it's wicked. They would say that there's something wrong with you. If you won't do this, it's because you hate people. If you don't do this, it's because... So there's a lot of that now, and that was what was happening here. And Ezekiel, in the midst of that, in the midst of a season, much like this one, even worse than this one, he's proclaiming a very radically different message. Everyone's saying, why is this happening to us? Woe is us. And Ezekiel is saying, you deserve every bit of this and more. We as God's people need to be willing to say whatever God asks us to say. And I think more importantly, we need to be willing to listen to anything God is wanting to say. Because when we look at our circumstances and we say this isn't fair, and God is saying, I'm doing exactly what I'm doing and you need to trust me, we should just say, okay, amen. But that's hard to do. And this was certainly hard for Ezekiel to share and hard for the people to listen to, but it's still the truth. And then we get to see, honestly, something that's really hard to even wrap, I think, our heads and our hearts around, because God speaks to Ezekiel and he says, your wife, who is the joy of your life, the joy of your eyes, your beloved, she's going to die. And when she dies, you get to mourn not at all. Don't shed a tear. Don't mourn. Don't put on mourning clothes. Just move on. And Ezekiel shares, God said this. He says it in the morning. At night, his wife dies. And he doesn't. He doesn't mourn. He doesn't. And again, this isn't because It wasn't a big deal to him. It wasn't because he didn't, like, God uses very strong language that this woman meant the world to him. She was the delight of his life. And I can't imagine, the Bible doesn't say, but these days where he's going out and doing these radical prophetic acts, as people are pretty angry around him, and he comes home, that he has this wife, this best friend, who comforts and encourages him in the midst of this person who's the delight of his eyes, and God's saying, she's going to die. And I don't want you to mourn at all when she dies. And Ezekiel loves God. And he says, okay. And so his wife dies, he doesn't mourn, and then he explains to the people, this is a picture. What was the delight of your eyes? This Jerusalem, this land, this place that you made about the gift rather than the one who gave you the gift is being utterly destroyed. It is coming to death. But do not mourn the death of the fall of this land. God is doing it. And so, I mean, God's asked me to do a lot of different things in my life. He's never asked me to do anything like that. And God, without question, is the one who asked and the one who commanded Ezekiel to do this. And I think, again, it's important for us to remember God doesn't just promise us riches and blessings and stages and groups of people who celebrate what we say and cheering and groups of people who support us. Those things are not part of it, potentially, for your life. But if we think that's what following God looks like, then we need to skim through this book again and see what does it really look like to follow him, and potentially what are some of the things that he calls us to. Pretty profound, pretty intimidating, pretty scary, humbling, weighty, and good. Any thoughts before we jump into the next one? Everybody feeling encouraged and excited about following Jesus? Me too. All right, chapter 25. You're like, why isn't there ever the husband that, like, I'm just kidding. Shouldn't the husband die sometimes? Okay, so chapter 25, we see really through 25 through 32 is judgment, warning, and lament about these places. I don't want to skip over them because it does matter, but I'm going to go relatively quickly through these to get to some of these last chapters, because it's really more of the same of what we've read so much about in the last few weeks as we've gone through all of this. So chapter 25, the first is the land of Ammon. I'm going to give you to the sons of the east for a possession. Like you have been wicked, you're going to fall. Because if you picture again, if you look at the map that Anya made, you're looking at all these lands that are watching around, and many of them are watching Babylon, some of them physically, like standing on the mountain, watching the armies of Babylon come into Jerusalem to destroy these people. And they're like, some of them are saying like, yeah, like you guys wouldn't trade with us or you wouldn't worship our gods. And so we're so glad that you're falling. Some of them are looking back and saying like, once Babylon leaves, I'm so going in and taking that land. And so there's all these responses happening around this people. And God is saying to them, your wickedness is the same type of wickedness I'm punishing them for. And so I'm punishing you as well. I'm coming against you as well. And the language of I am against you, I oppose you. This is God saying to these people. So first to Ammon, next to Moab, and he says, same as the guys before, same as Ammon, like I just said, I'm going to give you as a possession for others. Edom, I will also stretch out my hand against Edom and cut off man and beast from it. I'm going to destroy. I'm against you. Philistia, I'm going to destroy the remnant of the seacoast. I'm wiping you guys out as well. Then in chapter 26. So 25 is these short blurbs about these areas. 26 is the same thing, but it draws out with more specificity, talking about the culture, talking about some of the choices, and talking about some of the leadership. So this is Tyre. So do you guys remember where Tyre and Sidon are? Anybody remember? Anya.
On like the coast?
Yes. And so who is a major character from Tyre in that area?
Was it Jezebel?
Yes. Queen Jezebel. And so Mount Carmel is up there where the prophets of Baal are destroyed, looking over their seacoast land. And so this is a people we've known a lot about, we've read a lot about, and then it kind of talks a little bit about who they are. So at first, it's talking about the beauty and the wonder of some of these places. We're going to talk about Egypt here in a minute too, of like, you were given such gifts, you were given such beauty and such strength, and you did the wrong thing with it, essentially. And so judgment on Tyre. So what Tyre did when they saw Jerusalem falling, because they're a coastal city, and if you're a coastal city, you have access to all these other coastal cities in a way that an inland city doesn't. So you have bargaining chips, so to speak. But if you're a coastland city, what do you need? Who do you need to have great relationships with? The inland cities, who you're going to trade with. And who's the big inland city from Tyre and Sidon in that area? Jerusalem. So this land is the inland next step for trade. So they can reach all the way over to Rome and to North Africa on the other side. The whole Mediterranean Sea they have access to because of their ships. But once they get back, they need to cross through this land in large part to get to Egypt, to get to Babylon and to these other areas. So they're watching Jerusalem fall, and they start getting excited. Ooh, we're going to take that. We don't even have to have good relations with those guys anymore. We'll own them both. This is what they're saying. And so 26 continues, I'm going to bring up many nations against you because of what you've done. They will destroy the walls. They'll break down your towers. Again, on the ocean, you need the towers to be able to see the lighthouses and those things. I'm tearing it all down. And then again, it speaks about really interesting in the story of Tyre. Most of the time when you read about a people group being destroyed, it says like your sons and your fathers will be destroyed. The language for Tyre, it uses daughters. Why do you suppose that is? Because the leadership in this area, like Queen Jezebel, was women. So in the same way, when you read in your New Testament, when it talks about the books that talk about like the leadership of women and how the women were coming in and trying to take over the church, it's because in some cultures, the women were the unbalanced leader, dictator kind of position in that land, in that culture, which was true here in Tyre as well. And so he's saying, your people, the ones that you value, they're going to be slain. They're going to be brought down. And then in verse 19, when I make you a desolate city like the cities which are not inhabited, when I bring up the deep over you and the great waters cover you, then I will bring you down with those who go down to the pit. Like I'm going to send those to conquer you, and then I'm wiping the shore clean with what you have built up and what you've put your hope in. And then chapter 27, it's kind of the lament of Tyre. It starts out, "Oh, Tyre, you've said, I'm so beautiful, I'm so rich, I've perfected our cities and our construction, our architects and our builders, they're world class," and they were. They perfected the beauty, and they had ivory and cedar planks from Lebanon, and they didn't just build things that worked, they built things that worked and they made them massively beautiful. Like they were covered in expensive materials because they weren't just getting by, they were thriving in so many ways. And then it goes on to show not only were they so wealthy and were they so successful in building these beautiful things, it then begins to list all these huge cities. You traded with Tarshish, and you traded with Aram and Judah and Damascus and Arabia, and the whole world was buying from you, and you had great relations with all these great nations, and everyone knew who you were, and everyone was giving you their money to buy the goods and the things that you were bringing in. And then in verse 27, it says, "And all of this is true, but you will fall into the heart of the seas on the day of your overthrow." He's saying, you're right. The things that you're pointing to are true. You are well known. You are wealthy. Your buildings are beautiful and you're rich, and you don't just have a sail, you have a beautiful linen sail made from the finest linen in Egypt. You don't just have a deck on your ship. Your deck is lined with ivory. Yes, all of that is true. You're friends with this king, and you know this guy, and all of it's going to fall because you've put your hope in something temporary rather than me. And when you fall, and when you're great leaders, it names some of the great captains and traders and stuff of that day that we don't really know much of them, but they would have been like the celebrities of the day, so to speak. These are all your people. Yes, that's true. And when you fall into utter destruction, the screams of those same leaders and the screams of those captains of those ships will be so loud it'll cause the shores themselves to shake, because I'm going to utterly destroy you. And then in chapter 28, he speaks to the king of this area. And what's so fascinating, well, let me just read these first few verses. So he's talking to the king of Tyre. He said, because your heart is lifted up and you have said, I am a god, and I sit in the seat of gods in the heart of the seas, when in fact you are a man and not God, although you make your heart like the heart of God. And then in verse 3, if this doesn't speak a warning to us and to, I think maybe some of us specifically, but certainly something for all of us to hold on to. Behold, you are wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that is a match for you. This is God speaking to the king of Tyre. He's saying, you are so wise. Daniel, a guy that is, the guy who's bringing the messages, and we know the story of Daniel. We'll read more and more about him, but you're wiser than him. You are. Any kind of mystery, any problem that's brought to you, you figure it out. But your wisdom and understanding, you used it to acquire riches for yourself, gold, silver, for your treasuries. By your great wisdom, by your trade, you received increase for your riches, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. And then in verse 16, if you skip ahead, let me read 13 real quick. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. Like you have such great wisdom, and you used your wisdom to bring such great riches, so much riches that your robe was covered in like the finest of stones. I mean, you're talking like a $1 billion robe. Like you're super rich. You're super wealthy. Your wisdom took you really, really far. But verse 16, by the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence and you sinned. So God is saying you are wise, and you used your wisdom for all the wrong things. You used it to gain riches, and many riches you gained because you are quite wise. But you put your hope in something that does not last. And the thing that you thought would be your salvation was the very thing that brought you to destruction. And so you're going to fall. And you're going to fall by your own choices, by the thing you put your hope in is the very thing that will bring you down. The reason why I say this is important for us, because in a day like today, an information age like today, man, wisdom, intelligence, talent, ability, it can take you all sorts of places. And it can obtain for you all sorts of things that you think you really want or need. But sometimes the thing that you set out to get and the thing that you set out to obtain is the very thing that brings you to a place of destruction. Now look, I'm not saying God doesn't want you to have beautiful robes. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there's a huge difference between following Him and Him leading us and adorning us and giving us great gifts as we follow Him, where we thank Him for His graciousness and His generosity, because He's extremely generous. And then we continue to follow Him, not making those things the point. God wants to do amazing things for you and for others as well. But when we make those things the point, they become our downfall. And this is what happened with Tyre. God wasn't mad that he was wise. God didn't ever say riches are bad. He didn't ever say beautiful stones are bad. What did He cover His priests in? the high priest, covered in beautiful stones. But for what purpose? And to what end? And so this, and then at the end of, verses 20 through 24, Tyre and Sidon. Tyre really kind of became, at different times in history, they were sort of similar in their being renowned. Now Tyre was the much bigger, and Sidon was kind of more of a passing thought at this time, and Sidon's going to fall too. And then again, verse 25 through the end, it basically just explains, and Israel is going to be restored. The people that you were celebrating their destruction, thinking you could take the land, you're all wrong. You're the one that's going to fall. And the ones that you think are destroyed, I'm actually going to raise them back up. Then we come to chapter 29, where we go into a new area, so further down south. Thank you for bringing up that map. You guys can see that on these TVs too. So we're down now in Egypt. And so when you look at Egypt, what's sprawling through all of Egypt? Those rivers, right? Remember that. So when you think Egypt, think rivers. When you think Egypt, there's a coast, sure, but like in the midst of all the Giza and all these places, the major cities, and even later where Alexandria is built down in that area, it's in the midst of, there's rivers everywhere. And you can see it like sprawling out up through there. So judgment on Egypt now. So God, again, same language. I'm coming against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he says, you're a great monster that lies in the midst of the rivers. So there's language that's used for Pharaoh specifically, but also sort of for Egypt as well. Like, you're a big river monster. That's the language that's being used. You're a river monster. And when you look at the picture of what's there, river monster makes a lot of sense, right? Because that's what's happening here. I will put my hooks in your jaws. So how do you catch a river monster? You fish them out of the river. And so that's the imagery that God is using. You think you're a big, because the river monster isn't offensive language to Pharaoh and to Egypt. That's how they saw themselves. Like, we're protected. We have the ability to produce great crops because we have all this water in this desolate land. And we've built for ourselves these great pyramids and these great things. And we're impressive and known around all the world. And so we are this dragon, like river monster hanging out in this area, and no one can do anything. And God says, you're right. You are a river monster, but I'm going to catch you. I'm going to put a hook in your mouth. And you who thought you could not be caught will be caught. He said, because you've said the Nile is mine and I have made it. You called yourself a god. This beautiful land that you get to benefit from, you benefited so much that you decided, you know what, I made this. And this was common in this day, that leaders, once they became successful leaders, they would begin to call themselves gods. And this was very common in Egypt. Pharaohs either explicitly said, I am a god, or they were some form of god seen by their people. And then God says, at the end of 40 years, I will gather the Egyptians from the peoples among whom they are scattered. So he says, I'm going to push you out. I'm going to destroy you and take you out of this area because of your wickedness. And you're going to return. But from here on, you will be a lowly kingdom. Now, this is a long time ago that this happened. But Egypt, when you go there, you see these beautiful structures like you don't see anywhere else in the world. But the power of Egypt ended in this day, and it has never been a superpower since. And the difference, it's shocking, the difference between where they are and what's around them, like their glory days, so to speak, are far, far behind them. And there's a promise right here that says, I'll cast you out, I'll bring you back, I want the people to enjoy this beautiful, fertile land, but you will no longer be this superpower that you've been. Because when you look up and around the Mediterranean and those areas, and then when you go further out on the zoomed out picture that Anya made that shows the New Testament, everything over there, Egypt, for many of those places, was the dominant figure that everyone kind of like, whatever you say, will do that. So trade was controlled by them a lot. This was a superpower. Like as maybe some would see America today, or even America, 50 years ago, where like, everyone was kind of afraid of them a little bit, but worse, like this was Egypt. And he's saying, I'm going to destroy you. So this is a ridiculous notion. You don't look at a pyramid and go like, destroy us? Come on. I mean, you don't look at all these amazing things that are there and think, but God says, I will. And I'll bring you back, but you'll never get to be this again. And this is what he speaks against Egypt. And then in chapter 30, again, the same thing, the lament that you had all this good, you had all these riches, you had all this reason to be proud, this beautiful land, these beautiful crops, these fertile rivers that provided for you, but it's all going to come down because of your wickedness. And Babylon is going to come and destroy you, which then ties into our Jeremiah story, God said, don't leave Jerusalem to go to Egypt. It won't be far enough. You can't do it. Jeremiah puts these stones, these bricks down, says King of Babylon is going to set up his tent right here. And sure enough, Babylon comes in, disperses Egypt, just like God said that they would. King of Babylon sets up his tent right here in the place that Jeremiah set those bricks, and they do eventually fall. Chapter 31, there's a warning that Ezekiel speaks to Pharaoh. Now it's really interesting because the warning that's used is a story about Assyria. So where is Assyria on this map? Do you guys see it? Kind of up north, right? So who was Assyria again? They were the superpower before Babylon, right? Babylon took them over. Assyria, much like Egypt, was extremely intimidating. Everyone was afraid of them. They were the superpower of the day. No one could imagine Assyria falling. They're the ones that took northern Israel into captivity, right? So God speaks through Ezekiel to Pharaoh. Remember how no one thought Assyria could fall? Remember how they were this superpower that was taking over these nations and no one could do anything about it? And they were beautiful and fruitful, and they had all these riches, and they had all this power and all this military. And when you looked at them, you thought, it is impossible for Assyria to fall. How's Assyria doing now? It's not even a thing. Like, it's been extinct long enough to where people are like, oh crap, yeah, Syria used to be a thing. He's saying, you're going to be just like that. As powerful as you think you are, as untouchable as you think you are, you're just like Assyria. You're putting your hopes in things that makes you believe you can't fall. But they did the same thing. And they fell. So much so that they're not even a part of the conversation anymore. We're reaching into history, not that far ago, but reaching into history to talk about a nation that everyone thought would last forever and is now gone. And then in chapter 32, we come back to the river monster picture. Yes, you're this big, scary river monster, but I'm going to throw my net over you, and you're going to be captured, and you're going to be destroyed. And again, the language he's using, I'm sending Babylon. The tool in my hand is going to come take care of you. And then in verse 15, when I make the land of Egypt a desolation, and the land is destitute of that which filled it, when I smite all those who live in it, then they shall know that I am the Lord. Again, this imagery that's used again and again and again. Why is God doing this? To draw people's attention to him. He is willing to destroy the land that he wanted his people to enjoy because it's so important that eyes would be drawn to him, that people would follow him, people would see his goodness, his strength, his power. So if you don't think he'll destroy you too, he will. But why? Because he's mad? Or because he wants people to know, I'm the Lord? Because what's happening rampantly in all these other nations? As soon as the people who took Jeremiah went to Egypt, what did they start doing as soon as they got there? Worshiping false gods. So he's saying, destruction. I'm God. Stop worshiping all of that. Stop making that the point. Destroys the nation. How did your God help you? When this building was burning, you had to pick him up and move him over here. He's not a God. Stop worshiping him. Stop sacrificing children to that false God. I am the Lord. I'll raise up Assyria. I'll drive out my own people. I'll destroy nations. And then like that, I'll turn them into dust. I'm doing it again, this time with Babylon, and I'll destroy them again. And what's left of Babylon? Nothing. The same thing happens again. And they couldn't believe it. Because they were so strong and they were so focused at what was in front of them. They were so focused on what they could see in that day. In some ways, it's good for us to think about this in the context of this country and this place. Because most of us haven't been that many places, haven't been that many countries. But I'm telling you, when our country is really new. There's buildings in other countries that are older than our country. Like a lot older. So some of these places, they have a context and an understanding of kingdoms rising and falling that we really don't have here. So there's this sense of ignorance of peace that things are good here and they probably always will be. But if God tarries and hundreds or thousands of years go by, I promise you, there will be stories and rises and falls of nations, including this one as well. Our hope cannot be in the security that we understand. It has to be in Him, in Him, in Him, in Him. Not stuff, not our wisdom, not our intellect, not in our armies, not in our riches, not in our trade, not in our relations with other great powerful countries. We've just read all of it will fall at the hand of God. So, there you have it. All that good stuff happening all over the world. All these people looking on at what God is doing, thinking the wrong things, having the wrong ideas of what they'll do with this newly unoccupied land. And God says, no, I'm destroying you too. When your heart is like that, you're going to be wiped out as well. And then we get to chapter 33. 33 is an amazing chapter. There's not a whole lot to it. It's not terribly long or anything like that. But the picture there is certainly a picture describing Ezekiel. But it's also, I would say, a wonderful example and a wonderful warning and a wonderful sobering way to live for the people of God. Because this is basically the watchman chapter. If a watchman is standing watch for what's happening around and an enemy begins to come up and they ring the bell and they say, hey, bad guys. And the people who you warn go, you've done your job. And their foolishness is what's bringing their destruction if they're destroyed. But if you're standing watch and you see bad guys and you go, well, no one ever listens to me. And you don't say something and they're destroyed, that's on you. So we cannot look to who am I, which is a really popular response from the characters in the Bible. I can't speak. I have a speech impediment. Who am I? What will I say when I get there? I'm just hiding in a wine press. All these reasons given for why you shouldn't be the person. I'm the son that was left in a field while my brothers that people thought would be a king were out here. There's questions that we can ask. There's things that we can look at. And all of those are the wrong things. And in this is the subtle, you can't control how people respond. All we can do is say, Lord, I want to hear from you. And Lord, if you speak to me and ask me to say something, to do something, if it's a weird prophetic act. This Sunday, there was something God asked me to do. It was in a conversation, and it was a couple people that I sort of know, I don't know super well, but I saw like this weight of expectation on them. And I felt the Lord tell me, say, go up to them, put your hands on like above their shoulders and lift this thing off of their shoulders. And I was like, I don't want to do that because they're going to think I'm so weird. But it was like, okay. And so I did. And I felt a little bit awkward, but it meant more and had more of an impact than I assumed that it would. You just have to believe Him. You just have to trust Him. And if it's build a brick settlement of Jerusalem and then like play army with it so that people know like destruction is coming. God, that seems really weird. Now don't go just do that because Ezekiel did it. But if God asks you to do something, even if it seems strange, follow Him. And even if you're sure no one's going to listen to you, if it's Him, do it. Even if you're sure that other people, don't think enough of your voice, or, again, I'm not smart enough, I'm not well known enough, I'm not old enough. Timothy, how am I going to lead these people? I'm younger than all of them. Paul says, don't look at your age. Be a man of integrity. Be a man that follows Christ. I'll move through that. God will move through that. And so just follow Him. Just believe Him. Do what you're supposed to do. And if people don't respond, that's on them. But if you don't do your part, and people pay a price for it, that's on you. And, we don't want that. But this was the word to Ezekiel. And this is who you are. God is saying you're a watchman amongst these people. All you can do is say what I've asked you to say. You're responsible to say it. You're not responsible for their response. But then there's this really beautiful insight into the heart of God. So again, those that say that that the God of the Old Testament is just an angry, violent tyrant. Verses, really it's kind of like 9 through 13, 14 in that area. But verse 11, God says, "As I live, declares the Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked." Do you hear that? I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. Now, is God willing to kill and to punish the wicked? Yes. But does he enjoy it? No. I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that the wicked turn from his way and live. I don't want to kill the wicked. I don't want to punish and tear down the wicked. What I really want is for them to turn from wickedness. This is Old Testament. That sounds pretty New Testament-y, right? This is Old Testament. In Ezekiel, while the people of God are in captivity or dying as Jerusalem is being destroyed, God says, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. What I want is for the wicked to walk in righteousness. And then something really good for us to hear. When I say to the righteous, he will surely live, and he in turn trusts in his righteousness, he is committing iniquity. But when I speak to the wicked and they realize death is coming because I'm so wicked and they turn to me, they walk in righteousness. So do you hear this warning? As Christians, if we're not careful, we can pretty quickly fall into this problem. I'm doing well as a Christian. Check it out. Look at all the verses I know. Listen to all the answers I know. I dress exactly like you're supposed to dress at church. I say the right things. I raise my hands all the way up during worship. I sing very loud. I have a lot of answers. Look at this money that I'm giving. Look at this work that I'm doing. Look at how often I serve. And I'm staring at all these things that I'm doing. All this righteousness that I'm doing. God says when you look at that, when that's what your hope is in, you are literally walking in iniquity, in wickedness, by practicing righteousness. What? It's him. It's obedience to him. It's following him. He says, do this. I trust you. Amen. He says, go here. I trust you. Amen. Say this. I trust you. Say this. I trust you. This is what he's called us to. Not gather the answers that we've learned or seen or heard someone else do and then pull from that in these situations that we're in. When there's a battle to fight of good against evil, what does God tell good to do in those moments? Is there a simple answer? No. Because sometimes he says, don't do anything. And you're like, but we're going to die. Don't do anything. Battle is mine. And then miraculously and mysteriously, a battle is won. Sometimes he says, stand back and watch. Check out what I'm going to do. And they watch as the battle is his. And sometimes he says, you're marvelously outnumbered. You need far less. Now I'm going to move through you. And the victory will be mine through you instead of you watching. And sometimes he'll say, march around a city and then scream. A wall will come down. Then go in and conquer. So what do we do with the situation in front of us? The answer is always the same. Always, always, always the same. Is we seek him and then we obey him. Never assuming what the answer is because we don't know. So in our circumstance we're in now, what do we do? If the moment that you heard what was happening, you knew what to do, you were wrong. Because you don't, and neither do I. Unless your answer is, I need to seek him. I need to hear from him. And when he speaks, I need to follow him. Because that's the only answer. Because quite possibly, if we don't do it this way, we are practicing righteousness that is actually iniquity and not real righteousness. Because it's by our own strength rather than his. Isn't that amazing, that little sticky web that we can get caught up in? Just like the people of God did back then. Anyhow, chapter 34. God speaks against shepherds, which is the problem that's leading to the place that we're in now. God says there's all these shepherds that are supposed to be leading, supposed to be helping, but what are they doing? I've got sheep that are sick, you're not helping them. I've got sheep that are lost, you're not going after them. I've got sheep that are hungry and you're not feeding them. But surprise, 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 you are fat, sassy, and happy taking care of yourself and not taking care of them. You've got all this money, you've got all this food, you've got all these things in this land, and your sheep are scattered everywhere. Look at the condition of the people that are there. Look at Israel, the Israelites, they're scattered everywhere. You're their leaders. That's not okay. So he says, what am I going to do? I'm going to go after my sheep. I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to bring them back. I'm going to assemble everybody back together. And your source of food and income and help that you've been taking, what I've been providing for my people and you've been using to help yourself, it'll dry up. So you're going to perish because I will no longer allow you to steal from what I intend to give all of my people for the benefit of just you. I'm removing you, leader. And what does that look like? What's literally happening in this time? How is he removing his people? Putting them into exile. I'm going to take care of my people by having Babylon come in and take them. Because what happens to the majority of the leaders in this exchange as everyone's taken? With the exception of the few Ezekiel's and Daniel's and King Jehoiakim, most of them, as you know, they did not end well for them. They're gone. So shepherds are removed so that sheep can be cared for, so that they can be boiled up real good to be refined and made pure. And then the end of 34 is, again, the restoration of God's people. As the shepherds are dealt with and God begins to deal again with his sheep. And you know what's pretty fascinating is, you know who the next king of Israel or Judah is after the fall of Jerusalem and everything? There isn't one. When they come back, you have leaders and you have people, but the kings and the kingdom rule that existed before here ends. Who is king before Saul? God. You had one pretty good king, and then you have a few decent guys smattered amongst the rest, but the vast majority of them are absolutely wicked. And God's people then become absolutely wicked. And at this point, as this king falls, who becomes king again of the people? God. The shepherd who was becomes the shepherd who is again. Kind of cool, huh? Then 35 and 36 are actually a really beautiful pairing of chapters. And the prophecy against Mount Seir. So this is the not godly people. You think, because a mountain is a really good place to be defended on. If you're on a mountain military-wise and someone's having to climb up a mountain to fight you, it's pretty easy to win. So mountains were strategic locations. And again, don't necessarily think Mount Rainier, that kind of mountain. Sometimes they were, but usually not near that big, but just a mountain of some sort, a hill of some sort that you built your city on that so that you could defend more easily. So you, O mountain, you think you're safe, you think you're secure, you think you're good, but you're coming to destruction. And then you, Mount of Israel, that are being currently and have been utterly destroyed, I'm going to reestablish you again. So everyone looks at the Mount of Israel and says, well, that mountain fell. But our mountain's secure. And God says, no, your mountain is going to be destroyed. And that mountain is secure because I will restore it again. And then chapters 38 and 39, we'll just briefly go over, but so I want to camp out on 37 if we can. So this is a frequently talked about message, and I don't want to say misused, but I think maybe misunderstood and then applied in a lot of ways. Anyhow, the gist of this is what happens. God takes Ezekiel up by the Spirit. So this is not necessarily a physical thing that he's walking through a desert and this happens. I maybe would use the language open vision. And so he is seeing these things, but it's not like where he was standing. So God takes him up, shows him this vision, and he's walking in this big, huge desert valley, and there's bones everywhere. Has anyone in here ever been to a desert? Like just a desert, and seen a bone there? What is, like, it's so light, it's so dry, it's like, there's nothing like it. If you see a bone from an animal that like recently died, it's very, very different than that. And so a bone that's been in a desert for a long time has like no life left in it at all. So there's this desert filled with these bones, and God says, Ezekiel, walk around and take a look at all this stuff. And so he does, he looks around, he's like, there's a lot of them. And God says, can I cause these bones to live again? And Ezekiel's like, you're God. You can do whatever you want. And so God says, okay, I want you to prophesy to these bones. And there's a couple different steps through it. And so he did what God asked him to do. And so he said, verse 7, so I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. So, like those shaker things that like have little pieces of something in it. Like if you imagine that times like a billion, like all these bones, because they're really dry, so they're very loud when they hit each other. So all these bones are coming together because they're people, so they're people bones, not animal bones, but they're all dispersed. And so they're all returning to their appropriate place and person. So ribs and legs and spines and like it's coming from wherever it was, like crashing into and pushing past all the other bones that are going to where they're supposed to go, and they're forming these human skeletons. Now, I don't know about you, but if God asked me to do this, my heart would be beating extremely fast in this moment. So all these bones come together, bone to its bone. And I looked, and behold, sinews were on them, and the flesh grew, and the skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. So the bones come together, you have all these skeletons, and then muscle, veins, skin, all this, the tendons and things all cover up these people. And so now, it doesn't say like were they standing or sitting or whatever. I picture that they were standing. And so now you have all these human figures that have all the stuff they're supposed to have, but there's no breath. They're not alive. There's nothing happening here. And then he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of Man, and say to the breath, thus says the Lord God, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain, that they come to life. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they came to life and stood on their feet. I guess maybe they were sitting or laying down. An exceedingly great army. So this picture we read in the next couple verses is God saying, as dead as Jerusalem and my people are, I can bring them back to life. Like, it doesn't matter how far gone. Again, they're being taken into exile. They were just destroyed. Their kings are wicked. Like, there is nothing that you're looking at externally and saying, I could see this turning around. Like, you don't. It's dry bones. And God says, no, I can do it. And I will do it. But I also think there's a really beautiful picture for us and forever, but for us and for today. When we read this last part about the breath. The word breath is the same word or often interchangeable for the word spirit. So the pneuma is the Greek word for spirit. A pneumatic tool means a tool that is powered by compressed air. So prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of Man, and say to the breath, thus says the Lord of God, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain that they come to life. We can have all the stuff and the pieces and the skin and the bones and the muscle and everything there. But apart from the breath, apart from the spirit, we're just sitting there or laying there or standing there. And I believe certainly this is a picture for this day, but I believe it's also a picture for our day. We can have lots of stuff, but if we don't have the breath, if we don't have Him, if we don't have the life that He wants us to have, and obviously the language is the Spirit. We need the Spirit to fill, to bring life, to empower, to cause us to go from being correct in anatomy, so to speak, spiritual anatomy, if you will, and to being alive. And I would just encourage you to just take some time and consider and to chew on this and to think of this and how this picture really is the upper room picture. You had the people that they knew Jesus, they heard from Him, He taught them, He explained to them. They had the bones and the skin and the muscle and the tendons and they were ready. And they were waiting in the room. And then the breath came. And then everything changed. And I think this is true for us as a whole, as the people of God. But I think there's the macro story of we need the breath of God. We need the Spirit of God to cause us to really be alive. But I think it's also important for us to remember in the micro as well. It is easy to have God say, I want you to talk to this person, and we're unsure. We're aware of our weakness or our lack of knowing. And so we're like, I don't know. If I do, I need you. Like, give me a sign. Okay, give me another one. Okay, I'm going to flip this over again. Show me another on this fleece again. Like, I'm, okay, wet on this side, dry on that. Like, and so we might need a lot from Him. I really need to know this is you. And then He says, this is me. And we say, okay, I'm going to go. And then God shows up. And we're like, holy moly, this is so cool. I'm so thankful. But it is possible for us in time to have God move through us maybe a few times, that when He says speak, we no longer say yes with a sense of desperation of knowing that we absolutely need Him in order for this to work. And we just believe that we can because we did it before, and we forget that it was Him that did it. And so we can step out and give a word, and we can step out and share something with someone, but without the reminder that we absolutely need the breath of God to breathe through us in this moment exactly as much as we needed it last time. See, this is the beauty of faith. Faith is not in that I spoke a message that impacted people once, and so I can certainly speak a message that can impact people again. That's not faith. Faith is that as unable as I was to say anything that last Sunday, yet God moved through me because He's faithful and He's good and He's able to. He is just as able again this week, so I don't need to be afraid because God has done it before and God can do it again. I just need Him. I can't. I'm just flesh and bone and skin and tendons. I need breath for me to be alive. Make sense? So I kind of want to close here. 38 and 39, it's the Bible. It's awesome. It matters. It has practical implications, but it's also eschatology, end time stuff as well. And so a lot of Daniel that we're going to go through, the last half of the book of Daniel is this stuff too. So I don't want to ignore it, but we just don't have the time to go through it. So here's the short version of Gog of Magog. So Gog is a person, Magog is a place. Through time, like even in early Roman time, this became like a story something that was true was turned into like a tale. And so like Teresa's tribe, the Nez Perce, there's the word for coyote is Itziayai. And so that is the word for coyote. But like it's turned into like if your kids aren't like going to sleep when you tell them to, you go, Itziayai is going to get you. You got to close your eyes and go to sleep. So it's a real thing turned into like a story to entertain or whatever. So Gog and Magog, or Gog of Magog, turned into Gog and Magog, or Gog Magog, and so it's got this scriptural truth of a real place and a people. So Magog is like Russia. So like where you see Assyria on the map, like think of the top of that map. That's kind of where it was. So it's this mysterious faraway land and this mysterious faraway powerful leader. And basically the picture is he's going to come in and he's going to destroy, and even when everything around is being destroyed, Israel won't be destroyed, and he's going to wipe out. And so there's this person, this thing is going to happen, but this is very much end times picturing that he's sharing of a day that's coming. And so read through it. It's awesome. Can be terribly confusing if you don't know that it's also about end times. But that's the gist of these last two chapters here. And so we'll close on that with, unless anybody has any thoughts or questions to add to all of this good stuff. All right, thanks guys. So next week, there is no Tuesday meeting. Because next week, I'm actually going to take a couple days off. And jerks. I take days off. So next week we won't be meeting. But the week after we will. And we're going to continue. So you have lots of time to study out the stuff we talked about today. Or not. I hope you do. And then also, we're going to come back and we're going to finish the book of Ezekiel. So 33 through... No, I'm sorry, not 33. We just did that. 40 through 48. And then we're going to do Daniel 3 through 12. Ezekiel 40 through 48 and Daniel 3 through 12. So we'll finish Daniel and we'll finish Ezekiel, and then all we'll have left after that week is Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, which is like 20 chapters between all three of them. We'll do that the next week. And then after that, Darcy's going to come and she's going to share the week after that, which I'm really excited about. She's going to be coming once a month to partner with us in this time. So thank you guys. Excited for finishing this up. It's been really fun for me. It's been an honor. I know that there is some repetitive in nature for some of this, but I really believe God does new things, but God doesn't change. And so his heart really has always been the same. And so I think anywhere that we read in the Bible, we're going to be like, gosh, he really does kind of have a way and a heart and a desire, and it really hasn't changed. And but I pray that it's blessed you, and I pray that if it hasn't yet, that in the years to come, there'll be an excitement and a joy and a desire to spend more time in the Old Testament and these books by being able to get kind of a big picture overlook of them. So bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.